we often say, oh, you don't change for other people, but actually a majority of change is for other people. We want to show up better in our relationships. We don't want to die alone. All of these different ways, these things that impact who we become. And it's not just this thing that we deeply want in ourselves. Like self transformation is a kind of team sport.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Duke's Download. I'm your host, James Duke Mason. And I'm so excited to have one of my favorite writers for a long time now. He's one of the most thoughtful, deeply reported, and respected voices in American journalism. And as I said, on a personal level, I just couldn't be more thrilled. So, Benoit Denizet-Lewis, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Benoit is a longtime contributing writer for the New York Times Magazine, an associate professor at Emerson College, and the author of best-selling books like America Anonymous and Travels with Casey. His work has been turned into a feature film, and he spent years chronicling identity, addiction, belonging, and perhaps most relevant right now, how and why people fundamentally change. His brand new book, You've Changed, The Promise and Price of Self-Transformation, which is out on April 28th, is exactly the kind of book I think we need right now that we've been waiting for. I'm reading it as we speak, and it hits hard because I've been doing a lot of self-work these past few years. I've gone through a lot of personal turmoil, transformation, when it comes to physical change, spiritual sobriety, exploring that, trying to become the best version of myself that I can be. Benoit dives into all of that: therapy, religion, psychedelics, long-haul recovery, gender and sexual transformations, ideological flips, even prison transformations. He asks the big questions: what makes real change click or stick? Why does someone else's transformation so often unsettle us? And in a world that feels like it's spinning out of control, why are all of us obsessed with reinventing ourselves? Or most of us, anyway. Benoit, welcome to the show. Like I said, I couldn't be more happy.
That was a very sweet intro. Thank you.
It's true. I probably have been reading your stuff. I mean, I know you've been at this or at writing for quite a long time, but I've been reading you since I think I was probably, 20 years, most probably. So again,
Wow.
thank you. Speaking of sort of your origins or when you started, you've been writing, as I said, for over 20 years for New York Times Magazine. How did you first get drawn to these big, messy questions and human questions of who we are and how we become who we become? Identity is a big theme, obviously, in your writing.
Yeah.
Was there a reason for that, or an origin, or an early assignment that made
Yeah.
that a priority?
Yeah. I mean, as I was working on this book for the last 6 years, which is too long to work on a book, my husband has made me promise that I'm not going to work on a book for a few years. Yeah, he's just like, you're better when you're not working on a book. But, so, I, yeah, I realized pretty young that I wanted to be a magazine writer. And I think I fell in love with the idea that I could like uh, sort of embed myself with people who are like fundamentally different from me and sort of drop in on people and have this kind of strange kind of intimacy with strangers and dropping into to I was really drawn early on sort of to two things. Like one was people who were very different from me, so whether that was like evangelical Christians, wrote a lot about religion, and in my 20s I looked like, when I was like 26 I looked like I was 19, so it was like very easy for me to like, and I was probably young, and I don't know, I felt myself like really drawn to writing about what was going on with my peers. And so I wrote a lot about I'd come out a few years before, so I became fascinated in writing about LGBT life. I was really interested in the ways that we like broadcast our identities, the ways that we hide our identities, the ways that we explain our identities. And I think probably the story that like propelled this idea to write a whole book about this topic was the experience of watching my friend and colleague at XY Magazine, Michael Glatz, decide that. So he was like, I mean, we were 22, like living in San Francisco, working at XY Magazine. I don't know if you read XY back in
Mhm.
the day, but it was, it was an incredible magazine because it meant so much to our readers, right? And it was so important. This was like sort of the internet had. It's like you could still feel like you were all alone as like a gay teenager or a young gay person in America, and so the magazine was really important. Kids would go to Barnes and Noble and like get the magazine and like put it inside another magazine if they were closeted so they could read it. And we got incredible feedback from people all around the country about how important the magazine was to them. So that was incredible. I had just come out of the closet a couple years before, so and then I meet Michael Glatz, who is like this seemingly like the so seemingly comfortable like in his sexual orientation and very very political. He was an activist, and we got in a lot of arguments because I was like, he was like much more of a like a firebrand and an activist. He was much more of a black and white thinker than I was. And so and then and he had this great relationship. Anyway, fast forward, uh, he comes out a few years later as ex-gay and starts to write these really awful things about gay people and it was this transformation of his identity from gay, very very progressive, very anti-religion, and 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 then switched. And it was a complicated. It didn't happen overnight, but it was a complicated series of events that is still a little bit mysterious. But he switched and became the opposite of all of those things, and that was very disorienting to all of us who knew him. And I think that's when I started to think about like what is it what must it feel like to feel like you're a completely new person and how much doubt is involved in that process, because when we claim new identities, it's really dangerous to admit to doubt because
Mhm.
we need buy-in from other people. So doubt is all over this book that I've worked on. Change is like so deeply connected with doubt, but we don't talk about it. We can talk about that more because I think it's really interesting. But
Mhm.
so Michael, it was completely disorienting. And then, it was interesting to see sort of like, okay, so Michael has his experience, whatever one makes of it. And then the rest of us sort of judge the transformation as real or not real, typically based on our political inclinations
Mhm.
or the direction that he switches. And so we either like cheerlead those changes or we say it's not real or he's delusional or he's doing it for it's a grift or whatever our explanations are. So I became like, I think that was a big part of then deciding, because Michael was sort of like an early preview of what we've seen over the last 10 years, which is like fundamental shifting of identity in a way that like we haven't seen since the 1970s. And Michael, and also he previewed the like political battles that we would have over these identity shifts. So because right, like it's not just like he's become ex-gay, he's then used as a kind of example for the far right to say that people can change. And so in the book I explore like the sort of contemporary ex-gay movement because they've been discredited but they've like rebranded in
Yep.
interesting ways, and they've pivoted to gender, and we can talk about that. I'll say one more thing. Like, so that was like the intellectual journalistic interest in this, and then there was also the personal interest. I think so much of what I've written about is always like both of those things. And so the like trying to figure out what would change mean for me, and could I change, uh and whether that was possible for me, and what I wanted to become. I've written publicly that I sort of struggled with addictive behavior, and so trying to figure out like, could that shift and how, um and yeah, and so but again, that was like both a personal thing and a journalistic thing because I wrote a book about addiction. And I was really interested in this idea, like, so what's the difference between someone who like makes it and gets sober and gets better, and then someone who doesn't? You
Mhm.
know, what are the like conditions or the personality traits that would um, help us understand that? So I think on a both a personal level and a like a journalistic intellectual level, I've been circling around questions of change and identity for a long time. I mean, I took a little break and I wrote a book about dogs, sort of, which was fun driving around the country with my dog. But
Mm.
yeah, generally, I've been really circling these ideas. You know, I'm fascinated by people who go all in, right? They like go all into their new identity, and I'm just not someone who tends to do that. So I find that really interesting.
I mean, there's nothing in a way, I guess, gender, obviously, but in religion, race, sexuality. I mean, those are like, in a way, the most fundamental, usually anyway, the most fundamental aspects of one's identity, And so, and not just, whether you believe that, I mean, which I do, but whether you believe that sexuality is an immutable characteristic or not, there's also, in addition to the biological factor, there's obviously a cultural, societal
Right.
identity that, most gay people or LGBTQ people take on. Not everybody,
Right.
probably. But, not to get too in the weeds on Michael's story, but obviously I watched the film. I remember
Yeah.
reading your article. Did you ever come to I mean, I know it's hard to read anyone's mind, but did you ever come to like, what are your feelings about, like, yeah, presume, actually, I don't want to put words in your mouth. What do you make of do you think do you think that sorry, that was such a big topic. I'm trying to articulate it correctly. Do
Sure.
you feel like his reinvention was from a place of true, whether it was divine, divine intervention, or do you think maybe it was? I mean, I'll let you explain it. But with all of your observations, what was your
Yeah.
best guess about where that was coming from? His ex-gay transformation.
I mean, there was so much happening. I mean, what's interesting about Michael is that he didn't go to like ex-gay camp or anything, right? Like this was, and no one was sort of pressuring him
Hmm.
to do the switch. So it's a combination of, you know, there were some illnesses that he had that he interpreted in certain ways. He had sort of kind of a mystical experience that he interpreted it in certain ways. I think he tried for a while. We know he tried for a while to sort of say, I can be a gay man and I can be a Christian at the same time. So he sort of tried to hang on to those two things. Um, and then he went all in but again, he had doubt about it. He didn't talk about that much, but there's a moment in that he told me about, and that he had some doubt, but he couldn't like admit to that. Um, yeah, it's really hard to know what's in his mind. I'll say what I think is so interesting about people who undergo like these big, seemingly big shifts, right? People say, "Wow, he really changed." So yes, in some ways, he really changed, right? His relationship ended. He like moved. He went to Bible school. Like his whole life just ended, and there was a new one that he had to create.
Hmm.
And so that's very scary. But I'll say like I think Michael, like on a fundamental level, and I became really interested in this throughout everyone that I was writing about in the book. I'm like, what changes and what stays the same,
Hmm.
right? And so his core personality, which was like a black and white thinker, always claimed certainty about what he believed, like that didn't shift. Like that, that's the same. He went from like
It
a
went from
black,
black to white, basically,
yeah,
or vice
yeah,
versa.
like
There's no
yeah,
like flipped into a great. Well, I guess maybe internally there was a gradual move, as you said. He tried being
right,
gay and Christian, then he just
right,
went. Finally, he got to the other extreme. But
yeah, yeah. And so, but and this is really interesting to me. Like the I have a chapter on sort of personality, right? And like
Mhm.
there are these tools that we can use to sort of tweak our personalities. And there are people who write books saying, yeah, you can change your personality. Um, I I'm skeptical of that. I think that people can shift their it all depends on how we define personality, but I think people can shift their motivations, the things that motivate them, the things that they want, that they desire. And there is evidence that people can make if they really work at it, or if they don't. I mean, much personality change is sort of like unintentional, like
Right.
illness or trauma or aging, and that change shifts our personality in some ways.
Hmm.
But so, but I explored this question of like what changes and what stays the same with so many people. Like I wrote about like this. He's like the worst kind of bully, and he was like, I mean, he was such a bully to his not to his friends, but like, and then he through a really interesting series of events became like this Buddhist now, and right, and so I talked to him about like what is you know what changed for you, and he was like, well, I don't know if my thoughts have changed that much, and I was like, well, I hope you're not like secretly wanting to like bully everyone. And he's like, well, no, but he's like, I have many of the same thoughts and I'm the same person. For him, it was like, I've changed what I do. I've changed my actions. Um, so it
Hmm.
just kept coming up, this idea of um, what changes and what stays the same when we go through transformations. And I think my book is slightly unusual in that I'm like looking at like this broad over like I'm going into these different like politics and mystical
Hmm.
spiritual beliefs and sexual and gender identity and all of the and name change and sort of like it's a kind of a uh it follows like my curiosities, and I hope that other people will be as curious.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I can't think really of a more topical, relevant subject because, I mean, even on a super broad level, I mean, you look at people like Mel Robbins and like people at this whole, like the whole, it's funny. A few years ago, as I mentioned earlier, I won't go into the details, but I mean, I'd be happy to. But yeah, I'm not going to do this in a therapy session. But like 3 years ago, I went through, say, use some like new agey, super cliche terminology, but like a few years ago, I went through like the whole what they now call ego death, and not that I went through
Okay.
ego death necessarily, but like all those sorts of Saturn returns, all these like things
Right.
where I just went
Right.
through a
Right.
really tough period of my life where, I just on every level I did like a serious self-evaluation and but it was funny because I really didn't realize until I started following all these Instagram accounts and
Right.
reading all these subjects like whoa, like I'm like I thought I thought when I was talking to people about these subjects that I was saying something super profound or something like, and then I
Yeah.
realized that about 200 or way more, 2 billion other people on this planet are going through the same sorts of things. It's not like I'm unique in like
Right.
my
Right.
self reflection and actualization and all that. Like, but anyway, to your point about how something that you were on the cutting edge of talking about these sorts of subjects, and then obviously with this book, you're taking it to a whole other level.
Yeah.
But why do you think it is that right now, in particular, this whole subject of self actualization, self manifestation,
Yeah.
change on an internal level? Why do you think now that that's become such a massive topic?
Yeah. It's been a massive topic. I agree that it is um, a big topic now. I think partially when we think about change, like the world right now for many people feels
Mm.
um, completely kind of surreal and insane and
Unnerving.
sad and angering and all of these things. I mean, I talk to my students, you know, like there
Mm.
is and the numbers sort of back this up, right? Like we're lonelier, we have fewer friends,
Mm.
we're more depressed, we're more anxious, all of these things. And so I think when we when we feel a kind of like inability to sort of impact the world or change the world, or when we're going through a moment like we are that is really challenging for many people,
Hmm.
I think there's a way, and this is only partially answering your question, but there's a way in which we try to control the things that we can. And so, th- you know, in the 70s, there was this kind of reaction to like disillusionment, political disillusionment, social change, right? And people like had two reactions, right? It was like we're gonna go in the streets and protest, or we're gonna like turn inward and meditate and go to ashrams and go to the bottom of the Grand Canyon and meditate, and then we're going to come out of that, and our energy, if enough people do this, is going to emanate outward and transform the world. um, and so I was talking to my students the other like actually last semester about sort of like what would it ha- where do they see themselves like trying to sort of be the change today. And they got quite angry with me in the sense that they're like, we don't even know where to start. Like, this feels impossible. Like, what are you
I'm not
talking
laughing. I'm
about?
not
Like,
laughing at that. It's just, it's so true because the world is
yeah.
so, for lack of a better word, so fucked.
Yeah.
You need to
No,
leave
I mean,
right
then,
now.
and they were like, they looked at me like,
I don't blame them for being like, what do you expect me to do? You know?
no, I know. Yeah, no, I mean, seriously. And it was really, it's a class that I teach sort of on change and identity change. And I love the class. I love my students, but like, they were they were like really like I'd never seen them so animated. So but the last chapter of my book like explores this question of like how do we be the change
Mhm.
today, and what does that mean? How do
Mhm.
we how do we like how do we stay sane? Um, and like everyone thinks, not everyone, many people think Gandhi said, "Be the change you want to see happen," and it wasn't him. It's this woman in Arizona who's 80 something, and I hung out with her, and she's quite interesting and fun and kooky and so like I went to her. I'm like, well, what do we do? And she's like, well, we're on the precipice of something. It could be really
Mhm.
bad. Something's about to transform. No, she's like, yeah, we're on the precipice and it's really exciting, and like we're either gonna like destroy ourselves, or some new thing is gonna happen and we're gonna
Mhm.
but we've been saying this since the 70s. So like this is like not new. What I think is interesting about all
I
of
have
the
to say,
like
let me just say, by the way, for
yeah
those,
yeah
for people that are going to buy the book, I hope you, this is, I hope this is intentional. You're actually very funny and very like, obviously very dry, and it's not like over the top, but
right.
you have a lot of amusing observations about people and about,
I'm
so I mean,
very happy.
I laughed out loud reading, parts of the book because,
I'm very happy you picked up on the humor. Like I mean, we're funny people. Like, we're funny
yeah.
creatures. Our change attempts can be funny. My change attempts are funny.
Yeah.
There's a lot
Yeah,
to
it's
sort of
not. I know you. It's not that you or I or anyone are like
yeah
sort of making fun of people or whatever. It's more just
right
that it's interesting to get an insight into the way people think, and
right
and again makes you reflect about yourself, and so it's a
yeah
you have to find the
yeah for
humor
sure.
in
And
a complicated world.
yeah, and I think so. Like you were talking about sort of all the like we live in an era of like optimization and like life coaches, and AI is only gonna like transform that. I mean, it's really interesting. Like, we have all these ways to change ourselves, and we have to like want to change ourselves and optimize and be the best versions of ourselves. And like all of that is great, but we also change like mysteriously. We change like there's this idea called the paradoxical theory of change, which basically says the more that we try to change, the less effective it is. And and it's not this idea that we should like just give up and say like to hell with it, whatever. Like, we have to have intention to change. But I think there's a way we can become so obsessed
Hmm.
um with it, as if we're like there's a lack of humility
Mhm.
around so many of our change attempts, that like we think we're like it's just us and we have to do it. And like we change, we change in relationship with people, we change in ways that we don't control and
Mhm.
know. And so I've been very
Mhm.
interested in experiences that sort of change people in ways that surprise them. So mystical, psychedelics, all of these experiences can be deeply disorienting. But I found in my own experience that that I had to like both have intentions, things that I wanted to do, but I also had to have like humility that like
Mhm.
I don't control the world. And one of the things that's sort of a running joke in the book is like, I've just become my father, and in bizarre ways. Like
Mhm.
it was never my intention to become my father. I mean, I love my father, but like I didn't want to be him. Like,
Right.
and and I've, we're both writers. We both written about change, like different aspects, but we both like have married someone from the Czech Republic. Like it's insane. Like my
Mhm.
husband is from the Czech Republic. My stepmom is from the Czech Republic. These are totally unrelated things, seemingly. Like I didn't choose. And so I there's this great quote from a writer, and I'm not going to say it exactly right, but he says, Gira Asim, and he goes, we have these 15 years of hubris driven confusion where we're like trying to change ourselves before we sort of just morph into our parents. um and so that's overstating it, right? Not everyone just becomes their parents, but there is this like obsession with controlling the change
Right.
process.
Right. And sometimes that just doesn't, you can't control it. I mean, you can try, but
You can try, but the people that I was really drawn to, like in this space of like how to help people change, were people who were like, it's mysterious. You have
Mhm.
some say in this, but like focus on conditions in your life, like adding conditions to your life, whether it's with other people or, you know, uh, whatever it is that like will make change more likely to happen, as opposed to like the way that so many people do change now, which is like with metrics and
Right.
like, trusting a metric over like how you feel yourself. And so, um, this whole world of like, yeah, these change agents, who are promising easy fixes, and many of them are some of these people are not transformed themselves. And so, but there's always been that. There's always been many um, sort of charlatans
Right.
in the
And
change.
the self-help,
Yeah, I mean, and that's always been the case, and it will continue to be the case, and maybe more so now with social media, where sort of everyone can become an influencer and claim. So I try in my book really hard to be like, I am not your life coach, and I'm not gonna like tell you what to do. I do try to offer things that I think could be helpful to
Mhm.
people, but I do not want to become. And if I do, please like email me and yell at me, like call me and yell at me, like a kind of sort of like guru on this stuff, because it's all very it's yeah it's very mysterious. And like, like my husband has changed me. Like we often say, oh, you don't change for other people, but like actually a majority of change is for other people. Like we want to show up better in our relationships. We don't want to die alone. We have to change for so yeah. And so like thinking of all of these different ways, these things that impact who we become. And it's not just this thing that we deeply want in ourselves. Like self transformation is a kind of team sport. And the people that we surround ourselves with are really, really important. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of people now are surrounding themselves with fewer and fewer people, and they're more and more isolated and just experiencing the world through their devices. And so, and I don't know. I don't. I think that's mostly going to change us for the worse, if it
Mhm.
if it changes us. So yeah, it's all complicated, mysterious, and I just like I feel in a way like less certain about like why people change because it's so, you know, uh, it can be so surprising and unexpected. And then the ways that we like explain it, right? Like political identity changers, they claim that they haven't changed, right? It's the only kind of identity change where most of them say, you know, I didn't change. Like my party went crazy, everyone else went crazy, but I didn't change. And so we see in different ways that like change is seen as both this like good thing
Right.
in some contexts and this bad thing, this suspicious thing.
Betrayal or
Yeah,
betrayal or cynical, posturing or,
right, right, right.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And you know, I like for 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 me, I think I changed because I changed most when I stopped trying so hard, and I stopped trying so hard to use like concrete methods. And I found a therapist who is like really like let's explore this together and let's let you be you and bring all parts of yourselves to this thing. Um, but again, it's hard to know, right? Because I did so for this book, like, and also for me, like, I did so many change workshops. I
Mhm.
did psychedelics. I did all of these things, and it's then we create this narrative about like, oh, what worked? This did this to me, and this did this to me, and it's it's kind of unclear.
You talked about, there's a phrase that you've used, which I love, which is so true, about how when you talked about changing for other people. Then there are the people. It's like it's a phrase you've used is how we're on the parole board when
We're all on
people,
the parole board, right?
yeah, when people change,
Yeah,
and yeah, and whether we intend to or not. I've experienced this in my own life where, you know, usually it's a mix. And this happens to most people at different stages in their life when they go and they have a change, whether it's getting sober or I don't know, starting a new relationship or new job or whatever it may be. But whether people are conscious of it or not, and I'm sure I've done this to other people, so it's not like I'm innocent, but like, there are the people who are maybe, whether it's like malicious or not, there are people who, not that they're necessarily trying to undermine your change, but
right,
they're so intentionally or not, they're sowing doubt by,
right,
or questioning the changes you made, and then there are the people who genuinely are like want looking out for your best interests, and genuinely want to motivate you, but they unknowingly, by constantly, maybe it sounds like I'm speaking from personal experience here, but it's true. I sometimes you go, oh, you can see someone really means well, but when
right.
you, but it can get kind of overwhelming when you've got a lot of people around you, or vice versa. I'm sure like I said, to other people. When there's always that, whether it's your friends, your family, your work
Right.
colleagues, social friends, there's always going to be people that are like, is this for real? Or, or have their own metrics about whether this is real change or not. You're like, wait a second, I've made all
Yeah.
these changes, but they're like, not good enough. Not, you get what I'm getting at. You get what I'm getting
Yeah.
at.
Yeah, I mean, change is like, there's that level, right? Just with our friends and stuff. And that's
Yeah.
always been the case. Like, right, when we change, we have to like convince our families or the people in our community, right? And I mean, when I talk about like the digital parole board, like
Mhm.
now change has to be narrated and broadcast,
And
and there's a
explain
whole
to the world
right.
too.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Look at
mean,
this is a weird reference, but I mean I don't know her and I don't want to do her dirty, so to speak. But like on an objective level, I find the whole JoJo Siwa. Have you heard about that? You know who
I've
she
not.
is?
No, I've
Okay,
not
she's
heard
like
of
I don't even know her music, but she's like a big I guess, big musician, and she's been on reality TV. But like a year or two ago, she announced that she was now straight or bi anyway, and was now dating a man. And the internet went ballistic on her, like, saying, how dare I'm sure there were lesbians saying, how dare you,
right. Right.
you're a traitor, And then there are the
Yeah.
people who were, I don't know, there were probably people out there who are going, good for you. Like it was just an interesting, yet another example of like all these people weighing in
Right.
on, but with very strong sort of opinions about someone's sexuality, which is
Right.
just, I mean, I used to be, I still am, as for like Republican closet cases. I still feel pretty strongly that maybe if just purely because of the hypocrisy that we should point
Right.
out. But when it comes to like some singer's sexuality, it's like, okay, I might have my own personal views
Right.
on the whole concept of changing your sexuality,
Right.
but that's not for me, in my opinion, to like to tell someone else. So anyway, it comes back
We
to the
do,
point
but we
of
do, yeah, all the time. I mean, it's
yeah,
we're constantly judging, and there's
yeah,
there's that, right? There's because all of this is sort of like booby trapped with culture war politics. So like these internal changes that we do are not just internal changes. They like people uh react to those based on what it says about the validity of a particular identity or not.
mhm,
And so the politics of this I find fascinating, and it's sort of all over the book, which is sort of like these, and I do it like I have a whole chapter on actual at real parole boards, like what
right,
we like murderers who had to convince parole boards that they were transformed, and like what's the narrative, how do we do that, how do we convince other people that we've been transformed, and because we have to do a lot of that. And when people are sort of have done something really bad and then they're coming back, or they're insisting that they've changed, we sit back and we say, well, this is too soon, I don't believe it. So we're always judging and doubting change, and we're also doubting it in ourselves.
mhm.
And uh, you know, I became like really interested in sort of these experiences that we have, like whether they're epiphanies, and like what do we do with those? Do we doubt them? So I tell the story in the book about like how I realized I was gay. I like, didn't, I grew up in San Francisco, and like right 5 minutes from the Castro district. I grew up in San Francisco, and, but I was like clearly doing gay stuff like as a teenager in terms of like pornography and like who I was attracted to, but I never experienced, I wasn't like most young gay people who like realize they're like, oh, I'm gay. Like, what do I do about this? Or I don't want to be gay. And what do I do? So I didn't have all of those like doubts. I just literally never, it never consciously came into my mind that I was gay. Like I never struggled with it. And
Yeah.
then one day I'm walking down the street in San Francisco, I was in college. I was back in San Francisco. And like I'm walking down the street listening to REM, and this voice was like, you're gay. What are you doing? And it was like this incredibly powerful moment where like my identity shifted in literally 5 seconds.
Oh, well, I see what you're saying. Like not just your attraction to men, but all the like. Not to interrupt, but I remember. I'm not gonna get it right, but there was a quote that stuck with me, and from Dreams from My Father, Barack
Yeah.
Obama's book,
Yeah.
where he said, I wish I had it off the top of my head, but something to the effect of, I had to learn. Oh, I remember it. I had to learn what it meant to be a black man in America, and
Right.
because he didn't grow up with African American parents,
Right.
and so not to put words in your mouth, but it sounds to me what you're saying is not just the attraction, which had been evident to you, self-evident,
Well,
but
no, it had not. So that's
oh,
the thing.
oh,
I know it's hard to believe, the attraction had never, like, I had never, well, so yes, like, I guess on some level I like recognized I was attracted, but it never, like, the idea that I was gay had never crossed my mind.
but the attraction to men, or the concept of being gay and all the sort of social, political, cultural implication and identity implications that came along with that.
I think I was so compartmentalized
Oh.
and shut down as a teenager that like I didn't even consciously say, "Oh, I'm attracted to men. What do I do about that?"
Hmm.
Like, and people have a hard time like
Like,
understand.
what
Like,
do you, not to get too intimate, but
yeah,
know how what to do about that in terms of like hooking up, like that kind of thing, or having
right. Well,
sexual
I
romantic
know as a teenager, like
interactions.
I think when I would do or when I would like lust after River Phoenix, or like all of these things, like, and like watch porn, like it was always so like disconnected.
I
It's
know what you mean.
impossible to explain. But I never wrestled with it. I'm like, oh, what do I make of the fact that I'm watching gay porn? I like it
Right, that
exists
makes sense.
like separate thing. And
Yeah.
then so the like realization, this like acceptance that, oh my God, I'm gay, and it happened, immediately, um, was a kind of really like life changing. That day I went to I was like, oh, I live 5 minutes from the Castro. Maybe I can go there. And walked over to the Castro and was like, where would I go and meet,
Yeah.
have sex? And I like opened one of those like things, and I'm like, all
Yeah.
right, like I'm gonna go to a gay club. And I went to Club Universe, which was existed at the time, and found someone visiting from Seattle. Went back to his hotel. Anyway, so
Mhm.
and had this experience, and so there's this like very powerful like one day I'm living one life, and the next day my
Mhm.
identity has completely shifted, and it complicated things. Obviously, I was in a
Mhm.
fraternity, and so I had to sort of figure out what I was going to do about that, and but it was this interesting like we like people can have like these powerful epiphanies, whether they're walking in the forest or through psychedelics, and they can often be very confusing, right? Like we get a message, like what are we supposed to do about that? Do we trust that? And so I became really interested in like these powerful moments or experiences or epiphanies that people have, and they can be psychedelic or religious or not, um, and sort of what we make of that. These transformative moments that for many people will say they transform for the better. Like we're much more we really believe like that your life can be transformed for the worse in like a minute with
Mhm.
trauma and assorted things, but we've been less interested in like maybe there's a kind of mental breakdown in reverse. Maybe there is a kind of thing, these moments that do transform us in really meaningful ways. And what's interesting is a lot of people who have those experiences are very confused by them, doubt them, don't want to tell other people because they
Mhm.
might, be judged for it.
Yeah. No, I relate to that personally. I think most of us do, one way or another. So I think it's a great place to a high note on which we can wrap up the conversation. But believe me, I could sit here with you. I would love to sit here with you and talk to you for a lot more questions that I had written down. But
Oh, sorry.
I'm
I'm
no,
sorry.
no, 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 no.
Yeah.
We covered a lot. I'm just
Yeah.
saying, like, there's so much we could discuss,
Yeah.
but I also love because that was one of the other questions was what gives you hope about what you've learned when it comes to change for humans' capacity to be better, to do better, but
Yeah.
also what are the negatives. But I think it's good that we focused on the positives at least at the end
Right,
there.
right. I mean, I can give you some more hope if you have 30 seconds. I mean,
No,
that's up
of
to you.
course. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I think like I, you know, positive change is possible. I've seen it in my own life. I've learned I've shifted the ways that I think of myself, and I treat myself better, and I'm a much better friend. Like part of
Mhm,
changing for me was like learning how to be a friend, right? Like learning how to be vulnerable in my relationships. And
mhm,
so all of those like has really transformed my life, like in my understanding of myself and how I treat other people and how I treat my
mhm,
friends. And that, how did that happen? A whole strange combination of therapy and maybe some psychedelics and maybe change things and mysterious things that I don't understand. Maybe just aging and like having different priorities. So um, I, I, change is possible, and it's all over the book, right? People changing in ways that um, you know improved their life and improved the way that they sort of understood themselves and sort of moved around in the world. And so I do, in the end, I think the ideal thing is that we both work on ourselves and that we also remember what Viktor Frankl said, which is that like sometimes we self-actualize by looking outside of ourselves and trying to help other people
mhm.
instead of being so sort of like
Yeah,
what are my metrics
self-consumed.
today, self-focused, and sort of also like devoting ourselves to causes and to other people. And I think we need both of those things, and we often frame it as one or the other. So
So true. Like, okay, now I'm gonna use a really non. I mean, I love the guy. He seems like a good guy, but I'm gonna use a very non-intellectual reference here. But like, I was just This is you'll laugh. I was just watching an interview with Pete Davidson and Theo Vaughn, And it was interesting because Pete just got sober like a year ago, but
Yeah.
he said something like, part of the gifts of being sober is you're not so self-obsessed anymore. And like he said, like, he goes, it's fucking exhausting, like being constantly sucked into your own bullshit and your own
Right.
problems. It's like it's
Yeah.
kind of nice to like think about things outside of yourself for once.
Yeah, and
And
yeah, when we learn to like that, like 50 or more percent of the thoughts that cross our head are like
yeah,
bullshit, like are not
right,
true and not
right,
helpful
right.
and just projections and stuff, like
And
once
figuring
we
out what's true, what's not, what bullshit am I feeding myself, what's
right,
what or what's sincere. In a way, it's like the best change can be just not thinking about yourself every single second.
yeah, yeah,
So I think, but I think have it, as you said, having that balance. It's about doing the work, but it's also about trying. I think we all hopefully are gonna help each other, and help
right.
make the world a better place, or try even in our own small ways, which is why I'm so happy you're here, because I think this has been a really insightful and great conversation. I'm really grateful. Thank you.
Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.
For all those watching, please order Benoit's book, You've Changed, which comes out April 28th. It's available on all the major websites, Amazon, etc. And please like, share, subscribe. Feel free to comment. If you have a question, send us an email at questions@dukesdownload.com. So
Cool,
thank you, Benoit. Appreciate
cool.
it.
Yeah, thank you.
See you next week. Thank you for joining me today on Duke's Download. This podcast is part of Pride House Media, hosted by me, Duke Mason, and produced and edited by Josh Rosenzweig. Original music composed by Nell Balaban. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And while you're there, leave us a rating and review. It really helps others to discover the show. I'd love to stay connected with you, so join the conversation by following me at James Duke Mason on Instagram and X, or by emailing me at questions@dukesdownload.com.